We're now working on the go days that go halfway up the skirt, as in the ones that are in this photograph. Okay, so earlier on you remember we did some marks halfway up. These are just general guidelines to follow. You need to measure from your top point right way down to however long you want it to be. Ours was 70 centimetres. Okay, next you just want to run the overlocker and neaten your edge all the way around the bottom. And then I've gone up the other side here, but I've left this because this is the selvage edge and it doesn't need overlocking because it won't fray. Next you need to sew them all together, but on this one I left a 9-inch gap from the top, so from there to there is about 9 inches. They've sewn all the way to the bottom here, as I did on the iridescent ones. They need to cut out more frills and ruffle more frills. I've cut out a strip that measured approximately 14 to 15 metres long, and I wanted these frills to end up at the 7 inches wide. So again, I needed to make them 8 inches wide before I've overlocked them, and by the time you've gathered them, should end up around just over 7 inches wide. But before you do this, I recommend that you have somebody help you through this whole process. Each time you do a layer, you will need somebody to pin it on for you and to make sure it's level, which can be very time consuming, but it will make sure that everything looks neat at the end of the day. The next thing we need to do now is to pin these back on. Again, I'm going to have my helpful mum, and pin them on for me, and then I shall be hand sewing those on, as with the iridescent ones. Just to give you an idea, this is what it looks like all spread out.
This is showing the second layer of go days that have been sewn on now. For the top layer of go days, we're going to go back to our iridescent fabric, and these are going to be 90-degree triangles again, and for Tracy it's approximately 70 centimetres wide. Just show you the whole thing there. And as an experiment, because we're finding that the go days are stretching too much on the bias, so what I've been doing is just running a sewing stitch about every third all the way down to the bottom to try and control how much stretch there is in the fabric. Then once those have all been cut out, I overlocked all the edges, and then, having tried it on Tracy, found out that they start at about 11 centimetres from the top, and that is about, about 3.5 inches from the top. Leave a gap and then sew all the way down to the bottom, and I've got 10 of these go days all together, so you then sew them all together ready for trying on. The frills for the bottom of this will be the same width as all your others, finishing off at approximately 7 inches by the time you're done. And I think we're going to have to ruffle about 12.5 metres altogether. There are two places where you can buy your iridescent crystal organza from, and this one is from eBay, and it is called MAT12B in white, and the seller's name is Angel Secret. And the second place you can buy it from is called J05 in white, and the seller is Good Fabric Store. I'm now going to show you how to make your curled fishing line. You need it to be quite tight to go through the hem of your frills, but it doesn't come like this. You have to make it yourself. You go to a fishing tackle shop anywhere in the high street or online, and I bought £60 strength fishing line, which starts off on a huge reel. This is a bit too much for what I need, but it's also the wrong diameter. If you put this into your hem, it won't make any difference and you won't get any curls. So we need to make it tighter. So I found this old piece of broom in the shed, and it's approximately 23 millimeters, or just under an inch. And what I did was cut a nick with a hacksaw at the top and at the bottom, and then I'm going to use that to secure the line before I actually wind it around the broom handle. Right, start by securing the end of the line into the notch, and then I'm going to wind the filament around the broom handle, and don't overlap this. All the wire has got to be separated. Every so often push the line together so there are no gaps in it, and just keep winding and winding, because you'll need quite a lot of this wire. I'm not sure how much of this I'm going to need, but I would guess at about 20 or 30 meters, which is quite a bit. When you've wound your fishing line around what you're going to use, just use your fingernail to check that all the line is separate and they're not wound over each other, and then using the second notch at the end, that is to secure the wire so it doesn't come off. Next, you need to boil up a saucepan of water. Make sure that it's wide enough for your roll to go into. I'm just going to turn the heat off and plunge your wire into that. Then make sure that it's submerged for about 30 seconds to a minute. Tip the hot water away and then put cold water into the saucepan and leave it for a minute or two until it cools down. Take it out of the saucepan and then leave it to dry for a few hours, or preferably overnight. Okay, we've decided to wire the second layer of our pleating right next to the petticoat, and with the fishing wire that I've now curled, we've decided to do about ½ meter fishing wire and then leave ½ meter without it, and then do another ½ meter, and so on all the way round. So to start off, you need to enclose the wire in the hem and then put that under the foot. A bit awkward. Oh, I've just... Right, I'm using a rolled hem foot, but for the first couple of centimetres you're just going to sew it down flat. So you need to set your machine to a zigzag and probably about 2.5 for the length of the stitch. So we're just going to do a few stitches front and backwards. Right, put the needle into the machine, into the hem, and lift up your foot. Now you need to guide the hem into the foot, which is always a bit awkward to do on your own, and then drop the foot. So you've now got your material up into the foot. Now, 2 operations you're doing at the same time here, keeping the wire out of the way and making sure that you roll the hem of your pleating. So as you're pulling this up to go into the foot, you're pushing the wire into the hem as well. And you can only do a couple of inches at a time, so take your time. It's always a bit awkward going over a seam. You might have to pull the material through at that stage. When I reach the end of the wire, I'm just going to force that into the hem and then sew a little bit further. Now I'm going to do backwards and forwards to finish it off. Oh, got stuck. There we go. So, right at the end, the wire should be fully enclosed with a few extra stitches just to hold it in place. Now I'm going to leave about 1/2 metre and then I'm going to start again.
Okay, we're now going to start working on the outer petticoat, the one that's in this photograph. I'm making it out of a pale lilac, very lightweight chiffon. Tried to get it as light as I possibly could. It's a polyester chiffon. I got it off a sale off eBay, but unfortunately they don't have a lot of it left now. We're starting here, cutting out 2 full circle skirts, and I already had a pattern handy to do this from when I made my Aurora costume. We've marked out my waist here, but we haven't cut it at this point because the fabric is likely to stretch very bad once it's cut. So until we're ready, we won't actually be cutting a waist out because we're going to put it on a very wide yoke. As the fabric wasn't wide enough, the yoke will probably be a bit wider than the normal yoke would be for a waistband, but you'll see that in a bit. Right, next I've cut out 2 quarter size gurdets to be infills in the main circle skirt, because cutting 2 halves for a full circle skirt will not make your petticoat big enough to go over the amount of layers that you have. You need to add more fabric to your skirts to make it go out further. So basically here I've got the pattern piece for my full circle skirt. You need to fold it in half, like so, and then I cut mine to just over a quarter of a half. So then quarter your half, but when you cut your piece out you will cut it to a point at the top.
We have now cut our circle for the waist, and before we go any further we're going to put a stay stitch, which is basically a line of sewing to try and cut down any stretch at all in the material. So each half circle has just been sewn around. Start by putting the first go day in. This is one of the half circles that has been cut at a point, and it's going to be joined down one of the sides of the skirt. To start sewing, you don't start right at the top on this piece. You start a seam length in and then a seam length down, so about 1.5 centimetres from the top and 1.5 centimetres from the edge, and then you sew all the way down the side. Right, we've just put the first side of the go day in. Now we're going to join the second half of the skirt. So move these out of the way, turn them over like that, and then we will be joining the second skirt and start that off at the top of the waist, and now we're going to sew these together. This is going to have a back centre opening, so if you don't have a seam at the back, you're going to have to cut your fabric to create the space. But first of all, you need to sew a line of stitching approximately 4 inches down, that's about 10 centimetres, and then come up the other side, and then with a pair of scissors just cut down between the sewing. Then try this on over your head, make sure it fits okay. If it's a bit too tight still, sew another inch of stitching and then cut down again, and then try it on, see if that fits okay. We're now going to join both petticoats together, and we're going to use this 3.5 centimetre wide ribbon, and I need a length to go around the waist, so measure your waist. If you're going to be wearing a corset, then measure your waist while you're wearing your corset. And we're going to tie this, so we'll leave a length at both ends for tying. Now we've got to fit both petticoats into this space. So I found my halfway mark, and now we're going to put the petticoat onto the ribbon. For the waistband, we've now cut a piece of cotton material, which is approximately 5 centimetres wide, and it has been doubled, so make it 10, and then the length of it needs to be your waist measurement, and then add another couple of inches on either end. What I'm going to do now is just run a sewing line up the edge of each end, and then I'm going to turn the whole thing the right way out and then press it. Might be a bit difficult to see in this light, but what I've done now is just connected both petticoats at the top together with an overlocking stitch. The opening at the back of the petticoat, I've sewn on a piece of bias strip to make the opening a bit stronger, and I've also incorporated some hooks and eyes into the strip as well. Pin the skirt to the waistband, and you'll have a slight overlap at both ends like so, and then sew this in. Once you've put the waistband on, turn it to the inside and then turn under the seam allowance, and then sew all the way along your waistband to the end. Okay, this is just showing the actual petticoats now that they've been put on their waistband, and the last frill has been sewn on onto the bottom. The last job will be to overlock the actual skirt underneath, and then the petticoat, I think at this stage, is finished. The next set of petticoats are going to be put onto a yoke so that we can reduce the amount of any bulk around the waist. So this is the pattern I'm going to use. It comes down slightly longer at centre back and then gets narrower as we go around. The pattern piece I've put on at the moment, it also includes the seam allowances, so although it looks a little bit big at the moment, it will be smaller when it's done. And the front part of the yoke will be just a normal band going around to the side. We now need 3 full circle skirts that will go onto the yoke. The first layer will be blue and the next layer will be white, and the top layer will be the iridescent fabric. And down here where we've made the cut for the waistband, because we're going to have a yoke with a slightly different shape, what I've done is on the top layer of each one I've cut down a little bit further. Now you might think that this goes at the back, but it doesn't. This one will go to the front, and it's this section that will go to the back, but that will all make sense later on when it all goes onto the yoke. So the first thing we've got to do is sew up the side seams of all 3 circles, and we're going to have a side opening. So on the same side, on all the layers, we're going to have a seam opening approximately 4 inches. If we find that this isn't wide enough, then it's easy enough to change.
These are my yoke pieces for the waistband. Here we have the front and this is the back.
Make up your 2 sets of yokes with a seam, and then when you put them all together, make sure that right side faces right side, and then we're going to sew up the side all the way along the inside edge and then down. Then once you've done that, we're going to reduce the seam, cut the corner, and then cut the curve. Turn the yoke to the right side and then give it a press. Make sure that your seams are flat.
Okay, next you want to pin all 3 skirt layers together, starting in the order that you would want them to go onto your waistband. So I want it in the order of the blue, and then in the middle, just see it there, you got the ivory. Then on the outside I've got the iridescent stuff. Then you would just pin from one end all around the top edge of your skirt, like so.
When you get to the side seam, I'm going to be sewing down that edge to sew them all together, and then on the second edge I want that to fold over the top. So fold your seam under and then just pin that down, and then when you come along the top here you'll be sewing down to the bottom to finish it all off.